Okay, so our loaf is now ready to be baked. So this loaf of bread has been in the fridge for over 24 hours. But really anything 12 to 72 is kind of what I encourage. So it's still in the garbage bag, it's still in the Banneton. And I had lined this Banneton with a cloth for easy to get out. So this is going to be the bottom of my loaf. I'm just going to take a little bit of flour and sprinkle it on the bottom of my loaf. I'm going to pull the edges of my cloth to the side so that I'm not dealing with a cloth stuck underneath. And I'm going to flop it over onto a piece of parchment. I'm taking my Banneton off. And then I'm going to peel my cloth off. And it should come off pretty nicely. It shouldn't be too sticky. And this came straight from the fridge, so don't pull it from the fridge early, pull it straight from the fridge. And before we get our dough out here, you should make sure that your oven is preheated to 450 degrees. We can play around with temperatures. Every oven is going to be different, but 450 is a good place to start. I do not do convection, so just 450 degrees, regular bake. I let the oven preheat completely, and then put your Dutch oven in the oven. I line my Dutch oven with aluminum foil. That helps to prevent burn at the bottom of your loaf. So you put your oven is heated to 450, completely preheated, and then I put my Dutch oven in that's lined with the foil, and I leave that in the oven for about half an hour before I'm putting my loaf in. Okay, so this is my loaf of bread that has come from the fridge. It was in the fridge for over 24 hours. I'm sprinkling the top with flour quite generously, so what makes the contrast in a nice looking sourdough loaf is the contrast between the well-floured surface and then the part that you cut that is then unfloured and exposed. I have well floured my surface, and then I'm working my hand around, tucking under the edges. This is just called your final shaping. And this is just to make sure that we have good surface tension going into the oven, which is going to help with our oven spring. So that's this idea that all the air inside is like blowing up in the oven and creating this spring. It's called oven spring. So you need surface tension. So anyways, I'm just working my way around my loaf and making sure that I've got good surface tension. The top looks really nice. I've spread my flour out. I just use a razor blade. You can buy a tool called a lame, which is basically just a wood, metal, or plastic handle that holds the razor blade. I find I have more control when I hold it, but of course a razor blade is sharp on both sides, so you need to be careful. And my go-to design is a wheat sheath and then a cut, which creates an ear. You can do a lot of creative things, so I'm just using white flour here, but you can use any powdered fruit like hibiscus flower or matcha powder or black cocoa if you want to do like a cool exterior. You can also use food coloring or any like natural food coloring like beet powder or whatever, and do like watercolor painting. You should Google like watercolor sourdough loaves and they look really cool. But I'm pretty simple and I'm plain Jane, so this is what I'm doing. You can use a toothpick if you are not a artistic person and you want like to help yourself out. So if I want to draw a wheat sheath, I'm just drawing a line, 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 line. And then I can just trace for myself. That's what I'm going to make. And I can also rub it out and then it's not there anymore. So if you're trying to new design, a toothpick is your friend. If you're trying to create a symmetrical shape, you can use just a piece of like butcher twine or whatever kind of string you want to use and mark it out. Like if you're wanting to do an X and you're wanting it to be symmetrical, you can use a piece of string to mark that out for you, and that's helpful too. Okay, but I'm just going to freehand because I do this all the time and I know what I'm doing. So you're always going to do your small scores first. So scoring is just cutting your sourdough bread. That's the term that's used. You have to make at least one cut for your gases to escape, otherwise your bread would crack at the top, which is fine. It would just be less aesthetically pleasing. But if you want to make a cute design, you do your small scores first and your large score at the end. You do that because if you do your large score first, all your gases will come out of there and your air will come out, and then your small scores won't expand as much. So I'm starting with my small score. So I'm just going straight up and down perpendicular, and I'm doing my wheat sheath. And then for my big score, so for those small scores, maybe 1/2 inch deep, and I'm going straight down. For my larger score, I'm going like a good inch, inch and a half deep. And if you want your dough to open wide, you're going perpendicular straight down. If you want your dough to open up like an ear, you're doing on a angle to the ground, you know, a 45-degree angle. You're holding your blade. And I do mine quite large, so I start at the top and I kind of jig it down the first time because you don't want to drag your dough, so I just jig it down and then I do it again, making sure that it's nice and deep. And then you can see, you know, all the air bubbles in there and it's opening really nicely. I'm going to take my Dutch oven out of the oven, open the lid, and put my parchment paper whole thing in. So I'll show you. Okay. That's my Dutch oven. I'm taking the lid off. It's lined with foil at the bottom. I'm just pressure carrying my loaf of bread, and I'm putting it directly in to my Dutch oven. I'm covering it with the lid. And I'm putting it back in. I am going to bake my loaf for 25 minutes with the lid on and then 15 minutes with the lid off. I'm going to do a circular shaped loaf right now, and I'll talk through some of the oven components. Okay, but I'm going to set a timer so I don't forget. Okay, so the loaf that I just did was an oval shaped loaf, and this loaf is a circle shaped loaf called a boule. It's good to be mindful of the shape of Dutch oven that you have. Dutch ovens are expensive and you don't really need a Dutch oven. What you need is something with a lid. I personally don't have much success on open baking, but I mean, you can watch a million YouTube videos or Google open baking and you can try it yourself. Basically, the components of baking sourdough bread is you can control the amount of steam and you can control the temperature. Also, everybody likes different breads. Some people like a really crusty bread. Some people do not like crust. Some people like larger holes. Some people like smaller holes. You know, different bread serves different purposes for different things. So when we are talking about oven temperature and crustiness, the part where your lid is on is when you are kind of steaming your loaf. So you're not creating a heavy crust at that point, it's just growing. I prefer a less crusty loaf, so I steam for 25 minutes and then I take my lid off and develop my crust for that last 15 minutes. If you liked a crustier loaf, you could do a longer time without the lid on. Or if you find, you know, that your loaf is browning too quickly, you could turn the temperature down, or leave your lid on longer. Yeah, you don't need a Dutch oven. You can do 2 loaf pans, one on top of each other, and taking the lid off. You can also get generally like a turkey roaster, pretty affordable from any like thrift shop, and that works fine. Anything with a lid is perfect. Okay, so this is my bowl shape. And I am again going to flour the top generously. If for some reason I only had a circular banneton and I only had an oval shape Dutch oven, or vice versa, at this moment when I'm doing my final shaping, I'm tucking my edges under. It's pretty easy to make my circle bowl shape into a loaf shape if I wanted, or same vice versa. I could make my loaf shape into a bowl shape. So that's like totally fine. Okay, what should I do for a circle score? Something that I often like to do is 4 little wheat sheaths and then the cross. So I'm going to start in the middle and do my little wheat sheaths. We always do our smaller scoring first. And then I'll do my large X. And when I do the last one, I always pull into the middle instead of pulling away. And then if you want, you can just do a little nick underneath each of the peaks to encourage them to go upwards too. And then same thing, I'm going to grab my Dutch oven and put my parchment paper in the Dutch oven. Okay, and then again, we're in the oven for 25 minutes with the lid on and then 15 with the lid off. I'll show you my halfway check, or my lid off check. I like doing a cold proof, and I'll probably say this in the other video too. There's a million ways to make sourdough, and this is just what works for me. I like doing a cold proof in part because of my bake time. I'm putting a cold loaf into a hot Dutch oven, and that's creating a lot of steam, which is encouraging my loaves to expand and getting a nice rise. If I put a room temp loaf into the Dutch oven, it's not going to get that same level of expansion. I also find it easier to score my loaf when it's cooled. You know, your dough doesn't drag as much on a cold loaf as it would on a room temp loaf. Yeah, so that is part one of our bake.